The Andy Poland Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Whoa, it has been a busy week in Ashburn, hasn't it? Woo! All the players that are coming and going to the point where there are no players left from the 2020 draft, which was the first one under Ron Rivera. And there are now just 3 players left who were drafted before 2021, with Cam Curl now signing with the Rams. That's Terry McLaurin, who was drafted in 2019, Daron Payne in 2018, and Jonathan Allen 2017. There is one asterisk. That's Jamison Crowder, who came back last year. He was drafted in 2015, but it's all new faces across the board. And with Sam Howell getting traded yesterday, and it's a complicated exchange of draft picks, but from what I've been able to glean from reading things on Twitter and other places, they wind up in a pretty good spot overall, getting the equivalent of perhaps even a late third for him, or a fourth, depending on how you look at the numbers on it. But that's pretty good for a guy that it was pretty clear wasn't going to stay here. And just to show you more churn and burn at quarterback, we don't know who it's going to be. It could be Marcus Mariota, who right now is the only quarterback in the building. They introduced him yesterday. But they will have their 15th different starting quarterback next season since 2014. Okay? So take a look at the Green Bay Packers, who have had 3 starting quarterbacks in the last 32 years. In the last 10, Washington has had 15. And in terms of starts, Kirk Cousins, number 1 with 53. Number 2, and this really tells you how awful it has been at that position since they told Kirk to get the hell out. Number 2 in starts, Taylor Heineke with 24 during the period he was here. Remember, he came here as the COVID quarterback. He was brought in just in case with Dwayne Haskins and Alex Smith, and I forget who else was on the roster at that time, that he would have to step in. Maybe it was Kyle Allen who was with him, who would step in and play, and he would be separated from the other quarterbacks because, you know, he would be in like a quarantine situation. If the COVID went through the quarterback room, he wouldn't get it, and he winds up with 24 starts since Cousins was kicked out of town. Hal is number 3 with 18, and Alex Smith is number 4 with 16, the late Dwayne Haskins with 13 after that. And then you got a bunch of guys, including Garrett Gilbert. Remember Garrett Gilbert? Ryan Fitzpatrick, who got 16 snaps. Mark Sanchez, he played more than one game but got 1 start. And, it's been on and on and on and on. And we'll go through some of the moves that they have made over the past week. They had news conferences for a bunch of guys yesterday. I'll tell you something. This player that they brought in from Kansas City who's been a backup, his name is Nick Allegretti. He had, I think, one of the most impressive opening news conferences that I have ever seen from an athlete. That's not hyperbole there. There have been more famous players brought in to Washington, to other cities. But he talked for about 13 minutes. I mean, this is a guy who's trying to become the starting left guard. This is not the next quarterback of the team. And he was just so articulate and so descriptive of what it takes to be a winner, having been on 3 Super Bowl champions over the last 4 years with the Kansas City Chiefs and playing through an injury that would have put most guys out of the game in the Super Bowl, and how he was able to gut it out. He told the story very, very well, and we will get to that coming up in the next hour. But let's start here with basketball and what happened to Maryland yesterday. Man, they got hit in the head by a 2x4 in the first few minutes of the game. Wisconsin hit its first 6 3-pointers. They hit 10 of their first 13 attempts. They were up 47-26 at the half, and at one point they got it up to 40 points before they were finally able to win by 31, 87-56. Maryland was just never in this game, and it ends one of the more disappointing seasons that I can remember in College Park, because this is a team that made it to the second round of the tournament last year and brought back their three key players, including Jameer Young, who had a good year. He was first team All Big Ten. Dante Scott got off to a terrible start, was better at the end of the year. Julian Reese thought going into this season he had a chance to step up his game and maybe go to the NBA. I don't know if he's going to stick around. He may look for more money someplace else, and that's the way the game is played this year. But they got a couple of really big recruits, including Deshaun Harris-Smith from Paul VI. He was considered to be like top 5, something like that in the country, and he had a disappointing year. And more important than anything else was the incredible shooting that they had. Their shooting was historically bad. They were one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the country. There are 351 teams. I think they were 341. They're bottom 10 in three-point shooting, and in field goal percentage, they were among the worst at that as well, like 31%, something. I mean, just 35%, I think it was, but just awful. And Kevin Willard had a comment. I wish I couldn't find the tape, but this is what he said after the game last night. He said, the way we built the roster was good, but as the year went on, I was really just shocked at how much we struggled to shoot the basketball. I think our inability to make shots just led to 6 3-point or less losses, and that adds up. It just wears you down. I mean, you couldn't find anybody who could shoot. And you talk about recruiting, they really dropped the ball there. Now, Hakeem Hart would have been a good addition. He got big money to go to Villanova, so he left for that. And, it really wasn't much of a factor for them this year. That didn't pan out the way they hoped, but it was really a bigger loss for Maryland not having him. But still, that's something that has to now be addressed, and you're probably going to have a whole new roster next year. I mean, you hope that Deshaun Harris-Smith steps up and plays a little bit better. And maybe there's a chance Julian Reese comes back if they pay him enough money. That used to be a joke. Remember that? Remember when he used to joke about college basketball players, and you'd say, yeah, he'll stay there or he'll go there if they give him enough money. Now it's the way it works. They go where the money is. That's what Nick Saban said. He said that's all recruits are interested in. How much money are you going to pay them? And I've been a lifetime fan of this team. I've watched many of their games, the large majority of their games, I guess, over the last 50 years. And I just can't remember a season like this. There have been seasons that have been bad. Bob Wade had like a 9-win season, I think it is last year. And when Gary Williams was trying to rebuild the program after the probation, it took them a while to get going. But this was supposed to be a year where it was maybe even better than last year, where they would take a step up with these great players coming back, and only really one of them turned out to be that great this year. And Jamar Smith leaves, playing 5 years of college basketball, the last 2 here, and he'll get a look from the NBA and may play wide overseas or someplace like that. But it's just really remarkable how that went. And now you look at the whole landscape of college basketball and the way it looks. And I was thinking about the way it used to be at UCLA when they were the dominant team. UCLA, when Bill Walton played there, he was the best big man in the country and probably one of the top 10 college basketball players who ever played. His backup had a long career in the ABA and the NBA. His name was Swen Nader. And Swen Nader was at UCLA the same 4 years that Bill Walton was there. And he barely played because John Wooden didn't substitute very much. He was playing 6, maybe 7. But as long as Walton was healthy and wasn't getting in foul trouble, Nader never saw the court. Yet he was good enough to play in the ABA. And the NBA is one of the all-time great shot blockers, too. Yet he was probably in the top 5 of big men in the country. And had they had the transfer portal, at some point he would have had to have said to himself, look, I'm not going to play ahead of Bill Walton, so I'm going to go. But nowadays, you got situations where guys like, Hakeem Hart is an example of that. Key player for Maryland, sees more money to go to Villanova, goes. And this is now creating a state of college basketball where we don't necessarily have those great teams anymore because it's hard to keep them together. This is something that was kicked around last night on PTI with Frank Isola sitting in for Tony along with Mike Wilbon.
Jay Wright tells USA Today that he thinks the era of blue bloods is ending because really good players can transfer anywhere to programs so they can play right away. Frank, are you with him?
By the way, Kansas, their last 2 games, they lost by 50. Not the right way to go into Selection Sunday.
Yeah, crushed.
So all right, so who are we talking about? Kansas, Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina. We'll throw UConn in since they won the national championship. They're the defending
they've
champions.
won enough.
So of those schools, they're all in the top 25, and they've won 13 of the last 23 national championships. And then if you want to throw in Jay Wright and Villanova, that's 2 more championships.
Throw them in too.
So I'm not buying it because guess what? The best players are still going to those schools. I get it. You might have a disgruntled player that transfers out, but these programs also get players that transfer in. People still want to be part of that legacy, part of the program. I'm not buying it at all. And UConn right now is the favorite to win the national championship. So I disagree with Jay Wright on this one.
Frank, but I think there's context to this. And I've talked to Jay about this before. I agree with him. Because while you have those schools each can still pop up and threaten to win a national championship or win, we've seen that, with UConn and Villanova. We've seen that. In terms of all of them dominating the conversation and landscape and recruiting, no, they're not. They're not going to do that. And they have very down years now, which wasn't the case before. So I'm not saying all those programs are going to go away. I'm not saying the Blue Bloods are going to be extinct. And I don't think Jay Wright's suggesting that either. I know he's not. But, Frank, players now, kids now, they want to transfer out of their homeroom. If it didn't go well 2 days in a row in math class, they want to go to the portal. And they want to get to so the culture now just says bail. Bail on whatever it is because you can get a better deal across the street. The grass is always greener. That's where we are in these times and recruits. And so I think that Jay's on to something here. And by the way, this particular tournament is going to tell us that. Frank, is why the product is so not enticing. Women's basketball is so much more exciting and so much more attractive and appealing because people stay for 4 years. I know they got transfer portal too, but they don't bail every single day like the men do because they all think they're going to the league, even though they're not. Yeah. And everybody can play a little bit. They all can play. That wasn't the case 30 years ago.
But I get it. We get Butler going to the back-to-back national championship games. They lost both of them. We've seen VCU, George Mason in the Final Four over the last 20 years. Just last season, you had San Diego State make it, Florida Atlantic, Miami, but it was still UConn winning. Here's my only thing, Mike. The top recruits still want to be associated with the big programs. So Cooper Flagg, who's the #1 recruit in the country, he had it down to UConn and Duke. And what happens? All the big name, alums from Duke that are all in the NBA are calling the kid up. He goes there. So those schools are still going to get the players. I know it's hard to win with a lot of one and dones, but all these coaches would still rather take the talent, get the team together in August, and make a run for it in March and then into April.
Well, there's really no other way to do it now. That's Frank Isola and Mike Wilbon last night on PTI. Given the ability of the players to transfer year to year, I mean, what's the point of trying to build a roster? You used to bring in a freshman. He would sit behind a senior for a year, and by the time he got to be a sophomore, he's a starter. Doesn't work that way anymore. So you're building a brand new team every year. And it used to be just the Blue Bloods that did that, well, at least in recent years. For many years, Mike Krzyzewski held the line. He wasn't taking guys who weren't staying for 4 years. And then he started to lose to the teams like Kentucky that were doing the one and done. So he got in the one and done business, and he won more national championships that way. And that's the way college basketball works right now. You can't look at your roster at the end of a season and say, okay, these guys are going to be the core of my team next year. We're going to add some recruits and maybe a transfer or two, and we got our team. No, it's a clean sweep. And especially if you have a season like Maryland had, losing record, were they 16-17? You can't look at what you got on the roster and say, yeah, this is good to build around. They have nobody who can make a shot, for one thing. And if Julian Reese leaves, they've got nobody really with any kind of experience in the program. So, why not? Why not just construct a roster every year? And the question is, can these blue blood schools still find it attractive enough for recruits to go play there. There's still, a guy that's going to be an NBA player in a year and one of the lottery picks, one of the guys who's going to be one of the great players. Yeah, he might pick a Duke because there's still that shine on it, but it doesn't take that long for it to go away. Like I was talking about UCLA. Where's UCLA on the landscape now? Nowhere. They've been to Final Fours in the last 20 years, but right now it's just another basketball program. Connecticut is good now, and maybe Danny Hurley stays there forever, and he builds up a program like Bobby Knight did at Indiana or Jim Calhoun did before him at UConn. Maybe that happens, or maybe not, and maybe he has a couple of years where the one and dones don't work out the way he hoped, or the guys that he recruits and thinks are his guys don't like it, and they leave and go someplace else for more money. Until the NCAA gets their arms around this stuff, if they do, and I don't even know if it's going to be the NCAA, it's going to be some governing body where you have revenue sharing, where you have salaries, and when you have players sign contracts, this kind of chaos is going to continue. And what we're seeing now in college basketball, Wilbon is 100% right about the women's game overtaking the men's game. And we'll see next year, if there's no transcendent star like Caitlin Clark, how much interest there's going to be in women's basketball. The sport itself is already swallowed up by the NFL. The NFL has gobbled up on one of their biggest months, which is February, because it used to be we got through the Super Bowl in mid-January, and then, okay, you start looking at college basketball, and then you got the 2-month run-up to the NCAA tournament, which is an unbelievable event. Everybody pays attention to that, even if you don't care about college basketball. But if you have this circumstance here where you don't have the teams that you can look at, like Kentucky and Duke and UConn and Connecticut, whatever, you're not going to have any interest in it. And we'll see what the ratings are. The ratings are always good for the NCAA tournament because of the office pool. That's what people watch it for. They want to know how they're doing in their office pool. And I'm sure the ratings will be good this year, but how much longer does the sport the TV ratings are good enough, let's put it that way. They're still getting big money from the networks to televise the games. But the way that it used to be, with you knowing some of the stars, knowing the teams, it's not the same as it used to be. Like almost anything else. A new trivia question unveiled yesterday. Who was the last Washington football team kicker to kick at RFK Stadium? We'll get to that next. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
All right, we got Tony coming up at 11 o'clock today as we close out the week. So if I ask the question, who was the last Washington kicker to kick at RFK Stadium, you could do a quick Google search of the team for 1996, which was the last year that they spent at RFK, and say, oh, that's easy. That's Scott Blanton, who was a 3-year kicker for the team, came there from Oklahoma for the 1996 season. He was a rookie, was their regular kicker in 97, and like most kickers, went bad. The third year was released, 98, never kicked again. But if you ask who was the last Washington kicker at RFK Stadium, it was Blanton. Scott Blanton played all 16 games that year. That's not the answer. No. Yesterday, they had a whole bunch of guys in Ashburn being introduced, all the free agent signings that they've done, including Marcus Mariota. We'll get to some of the things he said in the next hour, along with Nick Allegretti, who was a backup with Kansas City, who I think knocked it out of the park yesterday. You don't usually get too excited about these introductory news conferences because most of the time, guys say, yeah, I'm here to win. I'll do whatever it takes. I bring this, I bring that. It's not very insightful. He was really good, and we'll play that coming up. But they introduced the new kicker, Brandon McManus. He was with Jacksonville last year, known primarily for his days in Denver, in 9 years with the Denver Broncos, after signing with them as a free agent after his career was over at Temple. And he wasn't even asked about this, but I guess he was asked about his familiarity with kicking at FedEx Field, and he said, yeah, I've kicked there before, but But the thing that you may not know is I actually kicked at RFK Stadium. Now, this guy came in the league in 2014. The last NFL game that was played there was in December of 1996. How is that possible? Well, McManus was, I guess, a freshman at Temple when they played in what is now called the Military Bowl. But the first one they had, it was called the Eagle Bank Bowl. I went to that. That was played between Navy and Wake Forest. Wake Forest won the game. The second year, they had UCLA playing Temple. They were trying to get one of the military schools in every year. You know, they got Navy in the first year, but they didn't have Army. I guess Army wasn't bowl eligible. Air Force not bowl eligible. So it's UCLA and Temple, and the weather, I remember, was miserable. It was cold, it was windy, it had rained, so the field was ice. And he quite obviously didn't kick a field goal in this game as UCLA won 30-21. But that was in 2009. So if you are in a bar and you want to win a bet, who was the last? Of course, he hasn't kicked the game for Washington yet, but we're assuming he's going to be the kicker this year. Who was the last Washington kicker, pro kicker, to kick at RFK Stadium? And the answer would be Brandon McManus. How about that? Now, here's the interesting thing about his career, and some of this relates to playing 9 years in Denver. He's an 81% career field goal kicker. That's pretty good. Remember, Mark Mosley, who played in a different era, Mark Mosley was a 65% career kicker and probably didn't attempt that many 50-plus yard field goals. Some, but not that many. McManus has attempted 82 field goals of 50 yards or more and has made only 45 of them. But he says there's something that you have to consider here.
Some blessings, there's a curse. You know, I think I attempt more long field goals than anybody. And so, you know, something I think that, you know, I'm best at is in under 50 yards, under 55 yards. You know, I'm one of the top 5, you know, percentages in the league. Now, I get some of my overall percentages get screwed because, you know, I'm attempting 70-yarders, 60-yarders, 59s, 58s in tough conditions at times. And, but the coaches have faith in me to attempt those, which, you know, I appreciate. And so, you know, I've always enjoyed attempting those kicks. But what I think that I've, you know, really honed in that, you know, I separate myself as one of the premier guys in the league is, like I said, under 55, you know, under 50 yards there. So, and with the new kickoff rules, you know, who knows what it's going to look like. I have always considered myself, and over the years, a lot of coordinators that come up to me have been impossible to read which direction I'm kicking the ball from because I have such a short approach. I only come from 3 yards away, versus a lot of kickers that come from 7 to 10 yards away and show where they're kicking the ball. So with the new kickoff rule, you know, it'll be an advantage for us.
They still haven't worked out the new kickoff rule, but he brings up a couple of interesting points about how it's going to work. One of the suggestions is to make it similar to the XFL, where you have the blockers for the kicking team and the kickoff team line up only 5 yards apart, so you don't have this big running start. Then you have deep, you have to have 2 men deep, and then you have the kicker kicking off where he kicks off from now, the 35-yard line. It's supposed to cut down on the big collisions and things like that, but what he's suggesting here is that he either kicks it out of the end zone, though they want to discourage that. They're talking about putting the ball on the 35-yard line on a touchback. But he's saying he's got an advantage over other kickers on kickoffs because his approach is only 3 steps or 3. I guess it's 3 yards instead of 7 yards, and so they really can't tell where the ball is going. It's an interesting thought. The other thing that's being discussed, not just for kickoffs, but well, it is this way for kickoffs, but for onside kicks, that the team in position to make an onside kick. In other words, if you're trying to come back in the final minutes of the game and you want to keep possession of the ball, you would have the option of starting with a 4th and 20 play. Some teams want to make it 4th and 15, but now it's moving in the direction of 4th and 20. So you get one shot to hang on to possession of the ball. You need 20 yards to keep the ball and keep a drive alive. If you don't get it, then the other team takes over and probably can run out the clock at that point. But, yeah, I mean, it's something you have to consider, and maybe they did. Maybe Adam Peters, when putting together this roster and making these changes, factored in the way the kickoff is going to go. And look, in terms of 50-yard field goals, how many of them do you try? You know, you may be at the end of the half, but when you attempt 50-plus and you don't make it, you're giving the team great field position when they take over. So I didn't check the numbers on kickers who have kicked in the league for 10 years. Is 82 high? Probably is. You know, because Denver, you got a better shot at it. But, you know, how many kickers have attempted 82-yard or 82 field goals of 50 yards or more? He has. He's made 45 of them. Not great, but you just heard the reasoning behind why the percentage is maybe not what it should be. Big story in the Post today about the deal that may or may not go through. It's not going to go through this year, that Ted Leonsis and Glenn Youngkin cooked up, where Virginia would borrow $1.5 billion from Wall Street and then use other sources of revenue to pay back the money, to pay back the bond. The team would put up $400 million. Ted Leonsis and his group would do that, and it would all work out great. Well, the way they've calculated how these fees, these taxes are paid back, it would include parking for $75 a car. Yeah. And that there would also be money from high-end hotels with an average rate of $731 a night. This is the paragraph from the Post story today. The February 28th analysis conducted by the Maryland-based public finance consulting firm Municap and obtained by the Post discloses for the first time that the financial plan assumes thousands of fans will pay $75 for parking. The team owner will host 53 or more events annually in Alexandria than it did last year at its current D.C. arena, and a new luxury hotel will book rooms at an historically unprecedented rate of $731. So we're going to have people flocking to Alexandria to watch what has been a terrible Wizards team this year and a Capitals team that may not make the playoffs, for $75 to park your car. And if you want to stay over, it's $731 a night. They have also seemingly inflated the number of events that would take place at this beautiful new arena every year that is just going to be nirvana for Ted. In addition to the $75 parking spots, that they would have plans for 100. Here it is. The analysis also cast doubt on how many events Monumental would realistically be able to hold at the Alexandria Arena. Capital One hosted 168 events in 2023, but Monumental's consultants at the firm CSL International projected the new arena would host 221 events based on the fact that Capital One hosted an average of 216 events annually in the 4 years before the pandemic. Okay, pandemic has changed a lot of things, and here's how much it has changed it. Municap reviewed 8 other big city arenas that host hockey and basketball games and found that only 3 hosted more than 200 events last year, including Crypto.com Arena, that used to be the Staples Center, in Los Angeles, which has 2 NBA teams, an NHL team, and a Ball Arena team and Ball Arena in Denver, which also hosts some professional lacrosse games. To get to 221 events, Monumental projected it would host 133 concerts and other events annually beyond the NBA and NHL. I don't know how many concerts are going to be worthy enough people flock to them to spend $731 a night on a hotel and $75 to park your car. Well, they point out many visiting athletes or performers who come to D.C. for Capital One stay at Four Seasons in Georgetown, which often charges more than $1,000 a night. Well, the teams pay for that in the NBA. In fact, they have a rule in the NBA. It's got to be a 4-star hotel, and that is the one that they choose most often. I know this because my friend Mark Boyle and the Pacers visit town once a year. That's where I meet them for lunch every year, and they stay at the Four Seasons. Yes, it's $1,000 a night, but the players aren't paying that. In the current market for high-end hotels, according to data referenced by Municap, the daily rate averages $195, less than one-third of the projected number on 66% occupancy. Municap wrote that the assumed performance is historically unprecedented for this area. So you get a hotel for under $200, but, oh, yeah, in Ted's world, people are going to flock to pay $731 a night, sure, and park their car for $75. They point out at Capital One Arena now, that the charge for underground parking is $60 to $100 a space. But, and I've done this many times, you can park around the arena for about $20. Monumental also plans to package underground parking in Alexandria with season ticket packages. Well, that's going to bump up the cost of the season ticket packages as well. So, when you start to do projections, it's like if you're selling the idea that you can hit 60 home runs in a season. You say, hey, you're playing 162 games. You're averaging 4 at-bats a game. I mean, do the math. If you got any kind of power, you're going to hit 60 home runs. And that's what this is. This is, it's just going to be a big boon to everybody because look at the amount of money we're going to get for how many people are going to pay $75 to park their car to watch a Verstunkene Wizards game in Alexandria, where it takes 2 hours to get there because of the roads. Coming up next hour, Marcus Mariota, what he said yesterday at his news conference, and also what Dan Patrick says he's hearing about Drake Maye. Interesting stuff. We'll get to it next. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Hey, we got a Tony Show coming up at 11 to round out the week. Also, can't wait to get to this later this hour. Robert Griffin III peddling revisionist history on what happened here in Washington. We'll play that about 10:40, 10:45 as we get to that. That Sam Howell is gone. We hardly knew ye, Sam. Started the last game of his rookie year against Dallas, threw only 19 passes. And then all of a sudden, he was propped up as QB1 for 2023. We're going to build around Sam. And as Sam gets better, the team is going to get better. And they got a new offensive coordinator in Eric Bieniemy. And we're going to see a transformation here. Well, as it turned out, that was, like many things, fool's gold. The Dan Snyder era had ended, technically, but new ownership didn't get into place until a week or so before training camp. So it was too late to make changes. But this whole offseason selling job of we're seeing some great things in Sam Howell, throwing around the name Tom Brady because Brady was a 6th-round pick and Howell went in the 5th round. And he does a lot of things that Patrick Mahomes does. And, as he played out the season, the flaws became more and more apparent. He was the most sacked quarterback in the league, and he had a problem with turnovers. And he just is turning out to be, and Seattle likes him. They gave up what I think the equivalent, various things you read, it's the equivalent of like a late 3rd round or 4th round with the various swapping of picks that went on. And Washington now has 6 of the top 100, which I think is significant as they look to rebuild the roster. But with Cam Curl agreeing to a 2-year deal with the Rams last night for $13 million, the entire 2020 draft class is gone from Washington. That was Ron Rivera with the coach-centric role, remember? So, yes, it was collaborative, he said, but realistically, he was calling the shots on the draft picks, and they weren't really good. And also now you have a roster that has only 3 players taken before 2021, and that's Terry McLaurin, who was drafted in the 3rd round in 2019, Deron Payne, 1st-round pick in 2018, and Jonathan Allen, 1st-round pick in 2017, plus Jamison Crowder, who's an asterisk, 2015, disappeared, then came back last year, and they just re-signed him. So he's going to be back on the roster. But 4 guys from draft classes draft classes prior to 2021, which is 3 years ago, are on the roster. And this, again, highlights what Charlie Casserly said last week in a podcast that he did with John Keim about how you turn your team around. And realistically, when you look at what's going on with this team and hopefully the big haul that they've had this week, that all those guys that Adam Peters has brought in, I think it's like 12, and then they re-signed 3 guys, something like that. That's going to translate to this formula that Charlie Casserly said he came up with when he was working as the general manager in Houston.
When I went to Houston, we did a study, of teams that turn it around in 3 years. So give them 3 years and he'll turn it around. If not, get rid of them. What we did is we did a study of teams that, quote, turn it around. When they, quote, again, turned it around, made the playoffs after 3 years, 12 of their starters were already in place. So they only added 10 starters in 3 years. Okay, so think about that now. Okay, So are there 12 starters here that will be here in 3 years, okay, that could give you a winning football team? Now, they're not all pros, okay, but
Right.
they're good players, okay? I don't know if they have that.
Yeah.
Okay, so sometimes it takes more than 3 years on that part there. Turning the culture around, I don't think there was a bad culture with Ron Rivera, so I don't think that's a problem. Okay, Ron Rivera, didn't have enough good players at the end. I think. Okay, I mean that's kind of it, and maybe some of his staff decisions, didn't pan out the way he'd hoped them to pan out. Okay, so I think that culture, I don't think that'd be a problem at all, not at all. Okay, now he's adding players. I mean, they're tearing it down. They traded Montez Sweat. Okay, that was a big one. Okay, to be honest with you, I wouldn't have traded Montez Sweat. Okay, that I wouldn't have done. I understand Chase Young had injury issues. Okay, I could see where you had to walk away from that one. So now getting the players. Now he's part of the process. Okay, but so is the general manager. So is the staff he brings in. So it's going to be all of the above things there to get them enough players. I don't think they have 12 guys now that'll line up and start in 3 years. That's just an impression from the outside.
Okay, so that's Charlie's formula. And again, it comes down to this. He says, you look at your team 4 years down the road. Do you have 12 guys on your roster who will be starters in 4 years? And if you do, you'll have a chance to be a playoff team. Well, clearly they don't, or at least didn't until this week. We'll see what this haul turns out to be. I don't think they have incredible hopes that the majority of these guys will be around in 4 years, but it's just giving you an idea about the rebuild. Not that a rebuild can't happen without that formula. In 4 years, you can get lucky with a lot of draft picks and free agents, like a guy, for example, like London Fletcher comes in here and was 32 years old and gave him like 5 or 6 good years and was part of a playoff team. He was the leading tackler. You might have that with a couple of the guys that they brought in. We'll have to see. But the reality is that's the formula. And you got to be real smart in your draft. You got to be real smart in free agency. And clearly they haven't been when the draft class from just 4 years ago is now completely gone. You ought to be getting 3 or 4 guys. It's 7 picks. You ought to bat close to 500 on that. And they didn't. They didn't at all, including, and remember, 2020 was the number 2 pick of the draft, Chase Young. That's supposed to be a future Hall of Famer, or at least a guy who's going to be a productive player for you like 10 years. And turned out that they had no interest. And here we are. We're a week into, a week including the legal tampering. Have you heard anything about Chase Young? Anybody looking to sign him? Not that I know of. Maybe San Francisco brings him back cheap for like 1 year on a prove-it deal. But, that illustrates how bad it has been. So we move on to the quarterback who is they're hoping will be a really good mentor for whoever they take. Now, here's the interesting part of this, because there was some thought that, okay, they're going to draft a quarterback at 2. You got Sam Howell, who's been here for 2 years, and you'll use Howell as maybe a guy to be a mentor. Maybe even Howell starts the early part of the season while you get the number 2 guy ready to play. Nope, didn't do that. They sent Howell yesterday to Seattle in a bunch of draft pick swapping, and Marcus Mariota at the moment is the only quarterback on the roster. And here's why Marcus Mariota may be perfect for this job. They're going to take a quarterback at 2, most likely. It's unlikely they're going to trade up or down. So there's a quarterback there. The quarterback that they take, unless it's Drake Maye, they could still take Drake Maye despite all the yak about how far he's dropping. The quarterback they take is likely to be a former Heisman Trophy winner. It's either going to be Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels, one of the two. And they're the last 2 Heisman winners. Well, when Marcus Mariota was taken number 2 in 2015, he was also the Heisman Trophy winner. Now, his career hasn't gone exactly the way he wanted it to. He was a starter for most of 4 years with Tennessee. Then he went to the Raiders for a couple years. Actually became the starter for the Falcons in 2022 when he started 13 games, and last year barely played at all with the Philadelphia Eagles. So he's done it all, And that's why he thinks he's uniquely qualified for this role.
I bring a lot of value in a lot of different aspects. If I'm called upon to be ready to play, I'm very confident in that. And I'm also very confident in my role as a mentor. So whatever this staff, whatever this team needs of me, I'm going to do it to the best of my abilities and just try to ultimately win games here.
And whoever comes in as the quarterback, he will be viewed as the franchise savior. He will become, whether it's Mariota or whoever they draft, he will become the 15th different starting quarterback since 2014. Since 2014, the leader in the clubhouse is Kirk Cousins, who's now on to a second team. He's now on to the Falcons after playing 6 years with Minnesota. He had 58 starts. Number 20, second at 24 is Taylor Heineke, who was brought in as the emergency quarterback, and Howell is number 3 at 18. So Tennessee had gone through some churn and burn at quarterback as well before Mariota was taken in 2015. So he has an understanding of what it's like to be brought in as the quote-unquote franchise savior.
It's not easy, and it takes a lot of work from a lot of different people. When I was coming to Tennessee, the team hadn't had a winning season in 14 years or something like that, and I think when you're coming in, that expectation for you to be the quote-unquote savior and all that is a lot. And I think for me now, to be able to have gone through that experience, if that's the way we go, I can provide a little bit of comfort knowing that, you know what, just be your best version of yourself. Don't worry about everything else. Don't worry about the expectations. Just go out there and just try to get better every single day, and the rest of it will fall into place.
Yeah, so he seems to be, well prepared for that. I think they told him, we're not the contract that he signed. It was $6 million. It's 1 year. It's got incentives up to 10. So if, God forbid there's an injury or whatever that he becomes the starter, he can make $10 million this year. But he understands it's going to be a backup role. And given that he's going to be 31 years old during the season, he also understands, having been in the league now, this will be his 10th year, that he can provide help not just for whoever he's going to mentor as the quarterback, but for the entire roster.
Yeah, I think I've dealt with a lot of different things throughout my career. I've been a starter, won a playoff game. I've also been cut. I've also been injured. I've also been benched. So I think all those experiences create value and also creates opportunities for me to build relationship with guys. I can build with the top guy of the roster to the very bottom of the roster. And I think that's important. I think sometimes you need guys like myself to be able to kind of glue guys together and, just be an advocate for the guys. So whatever that case may be, I'm looking forward to it and just going to do my best in my role.
That's the term, glue guy. He's a glue guy. He keeps everybody together. I've been there, done that. I've been to the top of the mountain. I've been to the bottom of the mountain. I understand what it's like. I've been cut. I've been taken number 2 overall. I've been the franchise quarterback. I've seen it, been there before. And there's this, and we heard this from Jacoby Brissett last year too. Now, Brissett was brought in with the understanding that he was going to back up Sam Howell, which he did because Howell got all 17 starts last year. But he did say, I'm coming in here to compete. I don't know how Cliff Kingsbury and Dan Quinn are going to run things, but I don't think when they bring somebody in that they're necessarily going to tell him, hey, you're going to compete for your job against a guy who's been in the league for 10 years. I don't think it's going to work that way. So Mariota says what even Joe Flacco has said this recently. He just signed on with the Colts to be a backup there to Anthony Richardson, but he has said, hey, I play football because I want to start. And Mariota says the same thing.
For all of us that are in kind of this position, you always want to be a starter. You always want to be a guy that's leading a franchise out there. That's why you play. That's why you do it. But I'll never let my own ego get in the way of what's most important for the team. And I really believe if that's my role, if I'm called upon to play, I'll do it to the best of my ability. If I'm asked to be a mentor, if I'm asked to help coach a young guy or whoever is with us in that quarterback room, again, I'll do it to the best of my ability. At the end of the day, I want to win games, and I want to be a part of a franchise that puts together a good product in the field.
Hey, and the likelihood is he's going to get starts. You hope not many, but he's going to get them. 60 different starting quarterbacks in the NFL last year for 32 teams. It's almost certain that the 2 are going to play. This is one of the relatively few teams that didn't have a second quarterback start games besides Sam Howell. And the hope is that whoever they take stays healthy. That's a big part of playing in the league. You got to be on the field. But Mariota will be ready to step in whenever. The Aaron Rodgers story, if you haven't been following this, there was a report the other day from CNN claiming that Rodgers had endorsed conspiracy theories about Sandy Hook, the horrible tragedy there of those school children being shot to death in 2012. And Pamela Brown, works for CNN, recalled that Rodgers claimed the shooting was actually a government inside job and the media was intentionally ignoring it. And he said this at the 2013 Kentucky Derby. The New York Times, of course, has also linked him to running with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on an independent ticket. And then back earlier this year, you remember when Rodgers stirred things up, suggesting without any evidence that Jimmy Kimmel would appear in the documents from Jeffrey Epstein, and then ESPN had to apologize. Kimmel just crushed Rodgers on his show. Rodgers now has said that that's not true, that he says, as I am on the record saying in the past, what happened at Sandy Hook was an absolute tragedy. I am not and have never been of the opinion that the events did not take place. Again, I hope we learn from this and other tragedies to identify the signs that will allow us to prevent unnecessary loss of life. My thoughts and prayers continue to remain with the families affected along with the entire Sandy Hook community. I don't know if there's any tape of what Pamela Brown is suggesting about Rodgers, that claiming the shooting was actually a government inside job. I don't know how you could possibly be a leader of a team again. Not that this makes a big difference. Rodgers doesn't have any kids. Many of the guys on his team have kids. That if you're a human being, you can't look at something like that and say that's acceptable. This is the leader of the team. This is the guy they've mortgaged everything for the Jets, and he's saying he wants to play 4 more years. We'll see how good he is coming off this Achilles injury where he played only 4 plays last year. So I look at this and, he had to say something about that. He could have just, let this stuff drift in the wind. So he made a statement, and you got to take it on face value that he doesn't believe some nonsense like that. But there's just so much swirl around him, and he's such an odd duck that you wonder, how he's looked at in the huddle. I mean, he's looked at as a guy who's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's won a Super Bowl. He's had an unbelievable career. But with all this stuff, I mean, there's got to be things that people look at him and say, really, dude? Really? You really want to say something like that? And is he such an egomaniac that he can actually consider running for vice president while the season is going on? The election's in November. He's going to spend 2 months as a running mate for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? No, I don't know. Seems strange. Coming up, maybe you are not familiar with a newly signed offensive lineman for the Commanders. His name is Nick Allegretti, and maybe you haven't heard what he has to say. He's really sharp. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Tony's coming up at 11 o'clock today, finishing up the week. What RG3 said about the end of his run in Washington. That'll be fun to listen to. We'll get to that coming up. Dan Patrick on his show yesterday, as Washington is now down to 1 quarterback on the roster. With yesterday, Sam Howell being dealt to Seattle, that leaves Marcus Mariota and the very, very likelihood of them drafting a quarterback at number 2. And we were hearing going into the combine, oh, yeah, well, it's going to be Caleb Williams 1, and Drake Maye looks like the clear-cut number 2 choice. And then over the course of the week, Jaden Daniels was all of a sudden the quarterback to take, and so much of a prospect that there was even talk that the Bears might use the number 1 pick to take him, and that Caleb Williams may slide down to number 2. And so Patrick has people he knows in the business. He's been doing this 40-some years. And he's got a guy who he says is well connected on these type of things. And this is what he found out in a text the other night.
My NFL source, who's a scout, was at the Combine. He sent me this last night. I'm sticking by Drake Maye, who for some reason seems to be falling, getting picked apart on minor flaws. None of these quarterbacks are perfect. Typical pre-draft nonsense. He will be a great pro. Big, smart, accurate, arm talent to drive the ball or throw with pace and touch. Will thrive inside and outside of the pocket, naturally athletic and poised. Very impressive one-on-one in interviews and understanding football. A leader, competitor, and perhaps will fall to New England. Well, I don't know if New England's going to take him at 3. If you're sold on him, then absolutely. It just feels like Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams have separated themselves. It was Drake Maye, Jaden Daniels, and Caleb Williams. And there really is a lot of momentum for Jaden Daniels being the best quarterback in the draft. J.J. McCarthy is getting a lot of attention. We've talked about it here. Michael Penix, if he didn't have the injuries, Michael Penix might be in that conversation, but he's had the medical issues. He's had the surgeries there. But these are just some of the things that my source gleaned from the Combine. But he thought that there's almost like this campaign to bring Drake Maye down a little bit. Sometimes that happens when a team wants to take somebody, so they bring them down. They criticize them. Or you start to tell somebody, I'm hearing. And then all of a sudden somebody tells somebody else that, hey, I'm hearing. And then it's a game of telephone.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way it works every year. And I've worked with Mel Kiper over the years, and he says the big problem is the draft takes place so much longer after the end of the season that this is what happens. People just talk. And, yeah, there may be somebody who's got their eye on Drake Maye outside of the top 3 and wants him to slide out of it. And, some of it is people like Merrill Hodge, who I respect his ability to analyze tape. Merrill Hodge says this is not a first-round pick. So who knows? He may be number 2, or he may be second round, or he may be third round. Who knows? It's just the way that this dance goes every year. So with all the free agents that are coming into Ashburn, they had multiple news conferences yesterday. And this is in no way criticism of Frankie Luvo, who may be the haul of free agency. They got him in the first day from Carolina, and they really like what he's going to bring as a linebacker. And when, they ask these guys the opening question, it's always somewhere along the lines of, what do you think you're going to bring to this team? And many of the answers were like what Frankie Luvo had yesterday.
Bring energy, tenacity, grit, dog mentality, and that's the type of game that I'm bringing to the table. And with the guys that we have around, man, I don't doubt that we're gonna make that happen.
And he's got a great name, Frankie Luvo. That's great. So he could wind up being a star here. We'll see. But that was him yesterday, and many of the news conferences went like that. And then they brought up Nick Allegretti. And I almost wasn't going to listen to this. These all appear, online on YouTube, and I go through these in the afternoon, and I saw his name up there. Okay, here's a guy who was a backup with Kansas City, and they hope he's going to start here, but they don't know if he's going to start here. And, it's an offensive lineman. Now, I've known them over the years, and they are some of the smartest guys on the team. Some of them I know fairly well, like Joe Jacoby and Jeff Bostic. They're really bright guys. But I was not really expecting this. And I'm going to play different sound bites here from Allegretti yesterday. Again, you see an introductory news conference for a guy who's hoping to play left guard. You don't usually see 13 minutes. They usually go 5 or 6. This one was 13 minutes, and it was very interesting. And it started with the question that all of these guys got, which was, why do you come to Washington?
A place to go start. And this was a great opportunity. Had a ton of respect for Coach Quinn. What he's been able to accomplish in his career, and the opportunity here looked like I had a great opportunity to come in and compete. That's all I wanted. I'm not looking for, here's a job. That's not what I need. I want a place that I can come in and compete. A ton of respect for the guys in Kansas City, but I enjoyed my role there. But I think that I had gotten to the point in my career where I wanted to come in. I wanted to be a starter week 1, and that's my goal. Coming to Washington.
Sorry, just to clarify, did they tell you you'll be the starter at left guard?
No, that's not what I'm looking for. I knew that they had some vacancies. Sam, Cosme was here from the year before, but I knew that center and left guard were open, and then they brought in Tyler, obviously, at center. But left guard's a spot that I'm looking at. I want to be the starter there. We'll never expect anybody to give me a job. I don't care about that. I want to earn that job, and I think I have a good opportunity here.
He also comes with a fistful of Super Bowl rings. Played 4 years in Kansas City, was on 3 Super Bowl winning teams. And he not only was a part of it, he knows how to articulate what it meant to be a part of it. And this was the question about, hey, what's that like? What can you tell us about being a Super Bowl champion?
When you win a Super Bowl, you see how, trying to not swear, first interview here, you see how awesome it is. It is really, it's amazing. It is one of the greatest feelings in the world to work your whole life for something, to work a whole season for something, and then get to that end of the year and accomplish that goal. And when you do it, you're like, man, you want it again. And the biggest thing that I can bring is just there's an aspect of really caring that the guys in that locker room had in Kansas City that I truly believe I have, and that's what I'm going to try to be here, is caring about the product that you put out every single day at practice, every single day in the weight room, and then every day you compete, whether it's walkthrough, game day. It is hard to show up every single day, work as hard as you possibly can for one goal when one of 32 teams is going to achieve that ultimate goal. But that is something that I hope to bring to this locker room, and truly loving the game of football, caring for the sport, caring for those guys in the locker room, and then just competing our asses off.
I'd sign that guy, wouldn't you? I mean, he's great. He not only has the passion, but he has the ability to articulate it. Also, you may remember that he was a last-minute replacement in the Super Bowl and got a chance to start. And then early in the game, first half, tore his elbow ligament, like a pitcher's injury where you'd need Tommy John surgery. And this is all about playing through that. Linemen need their arms. They need their elbows. They need to, lock their hands on an offense. They can't hold, but you've got to be able to extend your arms and be able to block. Otherwise, you're not of much use out there, and you're going to get Patrick Mahomes killed. So he played hurt, and this is the description of what he had to do to stay in that game after he injured his elbow.
I remember when it happened, I was pacing around. It was the 2-minute warning, and a couple guys asked me if I was okay, and my answer was no, because I was like, yeah, I had an injury like that in the past, but I immediately knew that something was wrong. I don't know, a bunch about anatomy, but something's wrong with my elbow there. But when we were able to brace it up, it bent. I was like that, I can bend my elbow. That works. That helps. So I was able to persevere a lot more than I thought I could, and that was something I'm really proud of. I take a lot of pride in, the job that we have as football players and completing the job to the best of our ability. And if there's any way for me to stay on that field, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, that's what's valued most among football players is the ability to play through pain. You probably heard me tell this story before, but when they had the 30th anniversary of the Super Bowl, they brought in 30 of the greatest players who ever played in a Super Bowl, and Joe Jacoby was one of them. And I asked him, who were you most impressed by meeting? Joe Namath was there, Bart Starr was there, Terry Bradshaw, Lynn Swann, Mean Joe Green, you name it. And he said Jack Youngblood. Jack Youngblood didn't win a Super Bowl. They lost to the Steelers in I guess, January of '81. And I said, well, why Jack Youngblood? And he said, because he played through a broken leg. So that's of great value to NFL players. It's seeing another guy persevering through pain to stay on the field because they know how hard it is for them to do it themselves. And the old saying, is it pain or is it injury? If it's pain, you play. If it's injury, you can't play. But he had an injury, which he said, hey, they braced it up and it could bend. Okay, good. But this is more about what he had to go through to stay on the field with an injury that would put most people out of the game.
That was the first time that I had to play through something like that. It was a challenge because being in this Super Bowl, it's such an incredible experience. And as soon as it happened, I was like, yeah, I knew something was wrong. I knew it was my UCL area. That's it. I didn't know if it was the muscles, the ligaments, what it was. And there was a lot of anger when it happened because I was like, man, am I going to have to pull myself out of the Super Bowl? And then the pain, I realized there was going to be pain, but it wasn't a limiting factor. I still had my right hand, which, I'm a right-hand dominant player, which was awesome. And then, the pain, it wasn't, once I went into halftime and realized it was gone, I was like, well, I'm not going to tear it anymore. So as long as I could handle the pain, and, compete and not hurt the team, there was no reason for me to come out. It was just, a couple more hours of pain. It ended up being a 4.5 hour game. I didn't need that, definitely. But, yeah, it was wild for sure.
Yeah. So he's really articulate and somebody that I think the organization needs to promote, and he's coming from where they want to be, which is a regular Super Bowl participant. Will they get there while he's here? We'll see. But that's a message that I would want to deliver to the rest of the team, and I would want to deliver that message to the fan base, that here's a guy coming from an organization that has done it the right way. Yeah, they got lucky. They got Patrick Mahomes, or 10, 12, wherever he was drafted. Those kind of things are things that you're fortunate to do, and not everybody's lucky enough to do that. But they built a roster. They got a team. And here's a guy who was a backup for 4 years and now is coming here with an opportunity to start. And I really like what he had to say yesterday. Coming up, Robert Griffin III was on a Ravens podcast the other day. And I always like to hear how he describes why it went wrong in Washington. And we'll go through some of what he said as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Tony at 11 o'clock. The jockeying for position in the draft is really interesting. Washington yesterday, in trading Sam Howell to Seattle, got picks that put them within, they get, 6 in the top 100. So not only do they have a lot of picks, but they have the ability with those picks to maneuver in the draft. You want to have that. You want to have the ability to move up. The Minnesota Vikings, who watched Kirk Cousins sign with Atlanta this week and then signed Sam Darnold, I don't think anybody believes that the Vikings are going to go in the season with Darnold number one, in the same way that nobody would believe Marcus Mariota is going to be the number one quarterback for Washington going into the season. But Minnesota isn't in the position that Washington is in to draft a quarterback because they're picking 11, and it's unlikely that anybody of note is going to be able to slide down that far. Maybe Drake Maye does, who knows. But the Vikings just made a trade with Houston to get a second first-round pick. They have their own, which is 11, but in the deal that they made for the Vikings, they gave them 3 picks, number 42 overall, number 188 overall, and a second-rounder for next year. And they get the 23rd pick this year, and then something close to Mr. Irrelevant, 232. So the draft capital that they have is 2 first-rounders. If you have a team that doesn't necessarily need a quarterback, can you get up high enough to get your guy with a package of draft picks, which includes 2 number ones this year, 11 and 23. We'll have to see. But that's some of the maneuvering that goes on. Let's review the career of Robert Griffin III in Washington. They moved up. They traded 2 number ones and a number 2 to move up 4 spots to the number 2 position in 2012. And behind Andrew Luck, who went 1 to the Colts, they took Robert Griffin III. And it looked like in the first year it was working out swimmingly for both teams. And Griffin had a spectacular rookie season. 20 touchdown passes, just 5 interceptions, and he ran for 850 yards, and he electrified the town. And at the end of the year, he got hurt in the Seattle game. He had suffered an injury a few weeks before, as a matter of fact, an injury that I was told should have kept him out for 4 weeks. He was back on the field after only 1. And in 2013, he came back with the idea that he was going to be a different type of quarterback. He was going to be Aaron Rodgers and not be the running quarterback because he thought that Mike Shanahan was sabotaging his career and he thought he would get hurt. And that season really unraveled, with Griffin really being bad for a big part of it. And with 3 games to go, Mike Shanahan, who knew he was on his way out the door anyway, said, the hell with this. We're just going to put him on the bench for the last 3 games. We want him. We're going to tell the media we need him to be healthy for the offseason, and we're going to go with Kirk Cousins the rest of the way. And they played the final 3, and they almost won 2 of them. Kirk was good enough to win almost 2. They lost those as well. It was a 3-13 season. No surprise that Mike Shanahan got fired. 2014, after he's run off the staff, he's told Dan Snyder, Griffin, hey, you got to get this coaching staff out of here. It's just not working for me. So they got him out, and the coaches scattered around the league to become guys like Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, who either win or make it to Super Bowls, and Washington got Jay Gruden. And Jay Gruden was seen to be a guy who was good with quarterbacks. He had played in college, played in the Arena League. He had been the offensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals. He had Andy Dalton there. Andy Dalton was good, not great. And, he could give RG3 the type of tutoring that he needed to get back to form of 2012. And it became quite apparent that they looked at RG3 and they said, no, he's not. And he spent that season being, in and out of the lineup. At one point, he was benched. He got hurt in the second game of the season. Griffin started putting out all these tweets with hashtag this and hashtag that, hashtag the movement. The players are going to get to call the plays, and Jay is okay with that. I mean, it was just a disaster of a season. And then you had, in those days, the 5th-year option for first-round picks. So he had played 2012, 2013, 2014, and then 2015 would be his 4th year, the 4th year under the rookie deal. But you also, in advance of that 4th year, had to pick up, if you wanted to, the 5th-year option that money would kick in for that. It was automatic payment of $20 million or something like that. But in those days, it wasn't guaranteed unless Griffin got hurt and couldn't pass a physical in March of 2016. Well, they knew that they didn't want to be on the hook for him, so they didn't play him at all in the 2015 season. He didn't even get a uniform except for 1 game when they had a bunch of injuries. So he didn't play a lick that season. Yet, when Griffin is on the Baltimore Ravens podcast hosted by Marlon Humphrey, who was his teammate, Griffin was a backup there for 3 years. This is what RG3 says about that 2015 season when Kirk Cousins led them to the playoffs.
That 2015 team was the most dysfunctional team I've ever been on in my life.
Really?
Unbelievable. The most dysfunctional team I've ever been in my life. You would not believe some of the stories that were going on that team, but we won the division. 2012 team, not dysfunctional at all to the public eye. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, even for me, I was blinded. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know that the owner and the head coach were beefing and that there was all these things going on in the organization, but winning cures everything.
And why were the head coach and the owner beefing RG3? Because you use the owner to undermine the coach. That you went to the owner and he was foolish enough to get chummy with you, and you went to the coach and said, yeah, we're not going to run these plays anymore. We're not going to run the pistol because, it's not right. I'm going to get hurt. And the owner backed you. That's dumb. Why was the beefing happening? It was happening, RG3, because of you. Because of you. Then they get to the turning point. And remember this. RG3 collides with Haloti Ngata, and I think it was game number 14. Yeah, 14th game of the season. And his knee goes in the opposite direction it should have, hyperextended. Should have been a 4-week injury. Probably should have put him out for the season. But he was making noise like, no, I'm going to come back next week. Well, they didn't practice him all week, couldn't practice. They start Kirk Cousins. Cousins plays well enough against Cleveland. They don't run the pistol, and RG3 and his dad watch the game, and they decide that they're trying to sabotage his career. And they come back and they tell him they're not going to run these plays anymore, the pistol. And Mike Shanahan says, well, this is what has made us successful this year. So if you want to play, you're going to run these plays. Well, they sort of did a hybrid of it. He really couldn't run that much. And so they ran Alfred Morris, and he had 2 great games against Philadelphia. And in the clinching game against Dallas to win the division, he had 200 yards. So then he starts the Seattle game. And in this Seattle game, he makes it seem like he got hurt late when his knee blew out. He got hurt early, right before they scored the second touchdown to go up 14-0, and refused to come out of the game. Refused. The story is they went to him at halftime and they said, we're going to make a change, and he wigged out. Do you know what I've done for this team this year? So he stayed in, and he stayed in long enough for the knee to completely blow out. But it was clear he was hurt for a good part of that game. Anyway, when asked about what was the turning point for him in Washington, after that season, remember, after the 2012 season, he did commercials for Gatorade. He produced his own documentary called All In for Week 1. Whenever there was a suggestion that he might not be ready, remember, he didn't play at all at the preseason, didn't really practice much, he would say, they owe it to me. They promised me that I would be the starter for Week 1. And sure enough, he was, even though Mike Shanahan said after the last preseason game, he says, well, I still have some concerns. And Dr. Andrews, the famed, beanie surgeon who did all the RG3 knee work, he says, Dr. Andrews has some concerns. They go to Andrews. He says, no concerns. He can start because he was being paid by Dan Snyder. So he starts, and that's, of course, the beginning of the end, the 2013 season. So here's the RG3 version of where it all went wrong.
It was the injury in the playoff game against Seattle. And it was a turning point career-wise because the next year I should not have played. I shouldn't have played in 2013 because I didn't just tear my ACL. So I had torn my ACL in 2009, came back in 2010 in college and played a full year, injury-free. Then we won the Heisman in 2011. So I had already had experience coming back from a knee injury. I know what it was like. But I tore my LCL, which is that ligament right on the outside here of your knee, and I still can't feel this. Like this right here, I might as well just not have a hand. I can't feel that.
Really?
Right? So that part of the injury made it so much more difficult in the recovery. And if I had taken a full year off, I would have been myself again. And I wouldn't have had injuries that now were piling up because of compensation, right? So because of that, just physically, I wasn't really myself until I got back to Baltimore.
And did you mention that the reason you didn't take off was because you were insistent that you not take off? The franchise was ready, but you were so insecure, Bob, you were so insecure about Kirk Cousins playing well and taking over for you, you had to get yourself back out on the field. Plus, if you produce a documentary sponsored by Gatorade, All In for Week 1, you can't be all in for Week 1 a year from then. So you painted yourself into that corner. Remember that. And when you go tell these stories, it sounds like you're blaming everybody else. That's you. That's you. That should have been you who said, I'm not quite ready to go. I'm going to take a year off. And that would have been the best thing for the franchise. And if Kirk Cousins played well, okay, you come back for year 3. You're both under rookie deals. And, they make a decision then. They trade one of you. But no. We can't have Kirk Cousins coming in and playing well. And that's Mike Shanahan's boy. And that started back when Shanahan drafted Cousins in the 4th round. It's like, oh, how could he do that to RG3? Well, that's called, that's the way it is in the NFL. It's competition. He brought in a guy who could play, who he thought could play. He was in the 4th round. He immediately named Griffin the starter because he knew how sensitive he was. So in the first minicamp, Griffin's the starter. And what they invested in him, it made sense that he'd be the starter, and he was great that rookie year. But remember, it was you, Robert. It was you. It was you who made sure that you were all in for Week 1. It was not the coaching staff. Don't make it seem like the coaching staff said, well, son, you got to get out there. We invested a lot in you. We traded draft picks to move up to get you, and you were the number 2 pick of the draft, and we got to have you back in form that you had in 2012. So get your ass in gear and get yourself out on the field. No, it's you. It's you. It's all you. And all the narrative and all the backing that you had from the owner, who is, as you said, beefing with the coach. Why was he beefing with the coach? Because you were undermining the coach. So these stories that you tell, these tales that you tell, those who know and know what happened back in the time. All right, that's enough. Don't want to end the weekend on an angry note, but sometimes I get fired up about those things. Tony is coming up next, and I'll see you back here Monday morning at 9 a.m.